Sources are calling it the confrontation that nobody in that room expected. Not a letter, not a go-between. Princess Beatrice, quiet, composed, the royal who never makes headlines, reportedly looked Camilla directly in the eye and said words that stopped the conversation cold. And tonight, we're telling you exactly what she said, why she said it, and why the palace has been completely silent ever since. You need to understand something before we go any further. The Royal Lodge is not just a house. It is not a nice weekend getaway with a decent garden. To understand why Beatrice would risk everything, her reputation, her standing, her carefully maintained invisibility, to go head-to-head with the Queen Consort herself, you first need to understand what that building means to the people fighting over it. Because people do not go to war over bricks and mortar. They go to war over what those bricks mean, who lived there, who died there, who loved each other there, and in this particular story, the Royal Lodge is soaked in all of it. Grief, loyalty, memory, and a very particular kind of royal stubbornness that the York family did not corner the market on, but has certainly mastered. And here's the thing that nobody is talking about loudly enough. Camilla did not expect this. The Queen Consort has navigated 3 decades of being the most hated woman in Britain, survived the death of Diana, survived the public's grief and fury, survived Charles's complicated ascension, and emerged on the other side wearing a crown. She is not someone who rattles easily. She has been in difficult rooms before. But reportedly, this particular confrontation caught her off guard. Because Beatrice is not supposed to be this person. She is supposed to be gracious and quiet and unbothered. She is supposed to be the good York, the one who didn't embarrass anyone, the one who married quietly and got on with it. And then she opened her mouth and said, by multiple accounts, something along the lines of, "You have no right to this." And Camilla, reportedly, did not have an immediate answer. Let's go back to the beginning, because to truly appreciate the weight of this moment, you have to understand how we got here. The Royal Lodge at Windsor has been associated with the Duke of York, Andrew, for decades. He took up residence there after his marriage to Sarah Ferguson, and even after the divorce, even after the scandals, even after Jeffrey Epstein turned his life into a slow-motion catastrophe, Andrew held on to that lease like a man clinging to the last proof that he is still royal, still relevant, still somebody. The lodge is enormous, 30 rooms, sprawling grounds, the kind of place that costs a fortune to heat and maintain. And it was the home that he shared with his daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, during their childhoods. It is, in the most literal sense, where they grew up. It is where their parents put them to bed at night. It is where they had Christmases and birthdays and all those unremarkable daily moments that make up a life. And now the palace, meaning Charles, meaning the institution, meaning the people around it, including and perhaps especially Camilla, wants Andrew out. The reasons are not hard to understand. Andrew is a liability. He has been stripped of his military titles, removed from public duties, and the palace has made every effort to put as much visible distance between the monarchy and the disgraced duke as possible. Keeping him in a 30-room royal residence costs an estimated £3 to £4 million a year in upkeep alone, and the optics of that, when the king is trying to slim down the monarchy and project an image of a leaner, more modern institution, are genuinely terrible. The palace has been pushing Andrew to downsize, to move somewhere smaller, to surrender the lodge to someone who can make better use of it. And Andrew has been, with spectacular stubbornness, refusing. He has said he signed a lease. He has said that as long as the lease is valid, the residence is his. He has dug in with the particular determination of a man who knows that if he loses the lodge, he loses the last visible symbol of his royal status, and that without that, he might as well not exist in the royal firmament at all. What the palace, and by extension Camilla, wanted to do with Royal Lodge once Andrew vacated is where the confrontation between Beatrice and the Queen Consort begins to make perfect, devastating sense. There have been reports, persistent and detailed enough to be taken seriously, that Camilla had designs on the property, not just as a residence, but as something she could claim as her own legacy space. Royal Lodge would, in that scenario, represent a significant upgrade in Camilla's own foothold within the royal property estate. It would be a place she could genuinely call hers, not Clarence House, which is associated with Charles's decades of waiting, not Highgrove, which will always smell of his first marriage, but something that Camilla could plant her flag in and say, "This is mine. This is what it means to be queen." And to accomplish that, Andrew had to go. The pressure on him escalated. The timelines became firmer. The hints became less subtle. And all the while, Beatrice and Eugenie watched this unfold with growing alarm. Now, here is where it gets complicated in ways that the simple Andrew versus the palace narrative misses. Beatrice and Eugenie are not fighting for their father purely out of filial loyalty, though that loyalty is very real and very fierce. They are also fighting for something more personal and more aching than the political calculations of royal real estate. They are fighting for their mother's presence in their lives, in the most physical and tangible sense available to them. Because Sarah Ferguson, Fergie, the woman the palace could never quite tame, has also been living at Royal Lodge. After her divorce from Andrew, the two maintained an astonishing closeness, cohabiting in a kind of royal separation that baffled outsiders, but apparently worked perfectly well for them. Fergie was there. She was at the lodge. She was in their lives, in their home, in the same building where she had raised her daughters. And if Andrew is forced out, Fergie goes too. And for Beatrice and Eugenie, that is not just an inconvenience. That is a rupture. That is the dismantling of the family unit they have spent their entire adult lives carefully constructing out of the wreckage of their parents' very public divorce. So when Beatrice confronted Camilla, she was not merely speaking as a daughter defending a father who is, admittedly, difficult to defend. She was speaking as a woman who is watching the last stable, familiar structure of her childhood home get pried away from her family by forces that do not share her memories of it. And she apparently decided, in a move that is either breathtakingly brave or breathtakingly reckless, depending on your perspective, that she was not going to let that happen without saying something directly to the woman she believed was pushing hardest for it. Not through intermediaries, not through careful diplomatic channels, directly, face to face. You have no right to this. The specific circumstances of how this confrontation came about are, as with everything in the royal world, somewhat murky. The palace does not issue press releases about argument between family members. Nobody is putting up their hand and saying, "Yes, I was there, here is the transcript." What we have is a composite of sources, people close to the family, courtiers who talk to journalists, the occasional strategically placed leak that serves someone's interests. And from that composite, a picture emerges that is vivid enough to take seriously, even if some of its details will always remain in shadow. What seems clear is that there was a gathering, not a formal meeting, but a family occasion of some kind. The sort of thing that happens around major royal events or celebrations, or sometimes just because Charles and Camilla are hosting and the extended family is present. And that during this gathering, Beatrice found herself in a position to speak to Camilla without the buffer of other people watching and listening too closely. What she is reported to have said was not a screaming match, not a tantrum, not the kind of scene that shatters chandeliers. Beatrice is not that person. She is composed, she is intelligent, she is emotionally disciplined in the way that people who grow up in the spotlight learn to be. What she reportedly communicated was something colder and more precise than a fight. It was a statement of principle. It was Beatrice making clear that she understood exactly what was happening, that she was not fooled by the bureaucratic framing of it as a matter of upkeep costs and royal efficiency, and that she was registering her objection directly with the person she held responsible. "You have no right to this." Those words, or something very close to them, were apparently spoken to the Queen Consort's face. And the room, or at least the corner of the room where this exchange took place, reportedly went very quiet indeed. What happened next tells you almost as much as the confrontation itself. Camilla, by accounts, did not explode. She did not immediately summon an aide or escalate to Charles. She listened, and she apparently said very little in response. Now, there are two ways to read that silence. One is that Camilla was genuinely taken aback, that she had not anticipated this from Beatrice of all people, that she was processing the audacity of it in real time and had not formulated a response. The other is that Camilla, who is nothing if not politically shrewd, recognized that engaging with Beatrice on the substance of the accusation would only make things worse, and chose instead the most devastating response available to a queen consort, to simply say almost nothing and let the weight of her position speak for itself. Whether the silence was surprise or strategy, it was striking. Beatrice had walked into that room expecting either a fight or a dismissal, and she got neither. She got something more unsettling, a measured, watchful stillness that may have said more than any words could. The aftermath of this encounter has, according to people familiar with the situation, been significant. Not in the sense that anything immediately changed. Andrew is still at Royal Lodge, as of the time this is being written, still refusing to move, still holding onto his lease with both hands. But in the sense that the dynamic within the extended royal family shifted in a way that everyone noticed. Beatrice had done something that most people in her position would never do. She had taken a side, loudly and clearly and personally. She had stopped being the diplomatic, careful, conflict-avoiding royal who floats above the fray and positioned herself as someone who is willing to go to the mat for her family. That is a significant thing to do. It has costs. It has consequences. And the fact that she did it anyway says something important about both her character and the depth of what was at stake for her. It is worth spending a moment on the history of Beatrice's relationship with Camilla, because it is more complicated than the headlines suggest. The York daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, grew up in the shadow of their father's exile from royal grace, but they also grew up watching their uncle Charles and their grandmother Queen Elizabeth navigate the painful, complicated question of Camilla. They watch their cousin William and his father's relationship with Camilla be one of the most analyzed and discussed dynamics in British public life. They watch the public shift, slowly, from outright hostility to something approaching grudging acceptance. And through all of that, they maintained a surface-level cordiality with the woman who was eventually to become their uncle's wife and then their king's queen consort. They were not close, but they were not openly hostile. They attended the wedding. They curtsy when curtsying is required. They do what the institution demands. But Camilla and the York sisters have never been warm. That is a polite way of putting something that, in private, is apparently considerably less polite. There is a long history of Camilla being uncomfortable with the way Sarah Ferguson has maintained her presence in royal circles, and with the protection and support that Beatrice and Eugenie provide to their mother. Fergie has not exactly been welcomed with open arms by Camilla's circle. The two women, Camilla and Sarah, represent, in some ways, completely opposite stories of how a woman can exist in relation to the royal family. Camilla came in through the back door, and eventually ascended to the very top. Sarah came in through the front door, was welcomed and then ejected, and has spent decades in a kind of colorful, chaotic semi-exile, making money where she can, causing headlines when she can't help it, and clinging fiercely to her daughters and her daughter's connection to the institution that threw her out. Camilla, who has spent 30 years crafting and protecting her own narrative, has reportedly never been entirely comfortable with Fergie's continued presence in the picture. And if Royal Lodge falls, Fergie goes too. And Camilla, if the sources are to be believed, would not shed a single tear over that. This is the context in which Beatrice's confrontation lands differently than it might otherwise. She was not just defending a father's lease. She was defending her mother's home. She was defending the place where both of her parents still, improbably and beautifully, share a life together. And she was doing it by confronting the one person in the royal family whose fingerprints she believed were most clearly on the pressure campaign to displace them. That is not a small thing. That is a daughter going to war. Let's also take a moment to consider the position this puts Charles in, because it is a genuinely uncomfortable one, and it tells you something important about the pressures he is navigating from every direction. On one side, he has his brother, disgraced, expensive, stubborn, a PR problem that will not go away, clinging to a property that the palace needs him to vacate. On the other side, he has his nieces, specifically Beatrice, who has now made it unmistakably clear that she considers the handling of Royal Lodge a matter of personal and family principle. Charles loves his nieces. He has always had a warmer relationship with Beatrice and Eugenie than some of the commentary suggests. He is also a man who has spent his entire adult life understanding the difference between personal feeling and institutional necessity, and he knows that the institution is requiring him to do something that is causing genuine pain to people he cares about. Whether he will ultimately stand firm on the pressure campaign against Andrew, and by extension against the Lodge, or whether Beatrice's confrontation with Camilla introduces enough family friction to complicate the timeline, is something that remains to be seen. What we can say with reasonable confidence is that this is not over. Andrew has made clear he is not leaving without a fight. Beatrice has made clear she is not going to watch quietly. And Camilla, who has survived far worse than a confrontation with a niece-in-law, is unlikely to simply abandon whatever plans she has for the property. This is a situation where three very strong-willed people, and let's not leave out Fergie, who is herself a woman of extraordinary resilience and determination, are all pulling in different directions around the same property, and where the stakes for each of them are far higher than the outside world might realize. There is another layer to this that has been somewhat underreported, and it concerns the way that the whole Royal Lodge situation interacts with the broader question of what the monarchy is going to look like in the years ahead. King Charles has been explicit about wanting a slimmer royal family. Fewer working royals, fewer properties, fewer costs, a smaller circle of people who operate as active members of the institution. That vision has already produced significant changes. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are in California. Andrew is effectively a private citizen. The question of who is in and who is out of the working royal circle has never been more charged. And Royal Lodge sits right at the intersection of all of those tensions, because it is simultaneously a question of a specific lease held by a specific person and a symbol of what happens to royals who have been shown the door. If Andrew keeps it, it sends one message. If he is forced out, it sends another. And who benefits from his departure, whether Camilla or Charles or the institution itself, adds yet another layer of meaning to every move in this particular chess game. Beatrice, for her part, is not a working royal in the conventional sense. She has a job, a husband, a child, and a life that is considerably more normal than her title would suggest. She does not appear on the balcony at Trooping the Color. She does not carry out official engagements in the way that William and Kate do, or even in the way that the Princess Royal or the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh do. She is, in the palace's taxonomy, a peripheral royal, present at family occasions, supportive of the institution when called upon, but not a central figure in the machinery of the monarchy. And that peripheral status is, in a way, what makes her confrontation with Camilla so significant. She had nothing to gain from it in terms of royal career advancement. She is not jockeying for position or trying to raise her profile within the institution. When she stepped forward and said what she said, she did it knowing that it would cost her something, knowing that the Queen Consort does not forget that kind of challenge, knowing that the ripples of it would spread through the family in ways she could not entirely control. She did it anyway. That tells you everything you need to know about how much this mattered to her. There's also something worth examining in the timing of all of this. The push to remove Andrew from Royal Lodge did not emerge suddenly. It has been building for years, escalating gradually as each new development in the Epstein saga produced fresh headlines, and each fresh headline produced fresh pressure on the palace to act. But the most recent intensification of that pressure has coincided with a period in which Beatrice has become, in several small but visible ways, more assertive within the family. Her marriage to Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi seems to have given her a stability and a groundedness that she perhaps did not always have. The birth of her daughter Sienna further anchored her. And there is a sense, from people who watch the family closely, that Beatrice has moved from the slightly fragile, sometimes visibly anxious young woman of her earlier public appearances, to someone more settled, more certain of herself, more willing to speak. The confrontation with Camilla may be the most dramatic manifestation of that shift, but it is not the only one. The relationship between Beatrice and her father is also worth examining because it is a complicated one, and it matters enormously to understanding why she would take this step. Andrew is not an easy father to love unconditionally. He has made choices that have embarrassed his daughters in front of the entire world. The Epstein connection, his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the allegations, the disastrous Newsnight interview, the civil settlement, has followed Beatrice and Eugenie everywhere, attaching to them in newspaper profiles and social commentary in ways that are not remotely fair, but are entirely predictable given the world they live in. They have had to be his daughters in public throughout all of it. They have had to walk into rooms knowing that people were thinking about it, knowing that their connection to him was the first thing many people noticed about them, and they have done so with a grace that under the circumstances is genuinely remarkable. But loving him through all of that has also, apparently, forged something strong. They did not abandon him when the world largely did. They stood by him. And when the family home, the place where he was still their father and not a scandal, came under threat, Beatrice decided that standing by him meant more than silent solidarity. It meant speaking. Eugenie, Beatrice's younger sister, has her own relationship with all of this, and it is worth noting that Eugenie is, in some ways, more visibly emotional and outspoken than her sister. Eugenie has made no secret of her love for her parents or her feelings about the family home. She has spoken publicly about the meaning of Windsor and Royal Lodge in ways that are unusually frank for a member of the royal family. The fact that it was Beatrice, the quieter, more reserved of the two, who apparently delivered the direct confrontation, rather than Eugenie, is something to sit with. It suggests that this was not an impulsive act driven by emotional overflow. It was a deliberate decision. Beatrice chose to have this conversation. She prepared for it, at whatever level such preparation is possible, and she walked into it with intention. The question of what happens next with Royal Lodge is, at its core, a question of wills. Andrew's will versus the palace's institutional imperative. Beatrice's loyalty versus Camilla's ambition. And at the outer edges of it, the question of what Charles is prepared to do to his own brother and his own nieces, in the service of the institution he has given his entire life to. These are not abstract questions. They are about specific people in specific places, making choices that will affect how they are remembered and how they live. And they are playing out in the shadow of a building that has stood in Windsor Great Park since the 18th century, and has seen more royal drama than its beautiful facade would suggest. People who know Camilla well will tell you that she is, beneath the composed public persona, a woman who has an extremely long memory and a very precise understanding of when she has been crossed. She has outlasted enemies more powerful than Beatrice. She has survived opposition that would have destroyed anyone with less determination. The confrontation with Beatrice did not, by all accounts, produce any immediate response from Camilla. No retaliation, no countermove, no escalation to Charles. But the absence of an immediate response should not be read as an absence of a response. Camilla plays a long game. She always has. The question is not whether she noticed what Beatrice did. The question is when and how she chooses to address it. For Andrew, the ongoing standoff at Royal Lodge has become something larger than just a housing dispute. It has become the defining battle of his diminished late royal years. The one arena in which he is still fighting, still refusing to accept the verdict that has been handed down on him. His daughter's willingness to fight alongside him, and Beatrice's extraordinary decision to carry that fight directly to the Queen Consort, has given him something he has not had in a long time: the visible support of family members who are making real sacrifices to stand with him. That is not nothing. Whatever else you think of Andrew, whatever your verdict on his conduct and his choices, it is hard not to be moved by the image of his daughter walking into that confrontation on his behalf. Love is complicated. Family is complicated. And the York family, in its messy, scandalous, irrepressible way, is one of the more vivid demonstrations of both of those truths. There's a version of this story in which Beatrice is simply protecting her family's material interests: the lease, the property, the financial value of the residence. But that version misses the emotional architecture of it. The Royal Lodge is memory. It is the place where she was a girl before she was a public figure. It is where her parents, despite their divorce, maintained something together. It is where the idea of family had a physical address. And the threat to that address is, for Beatrice, not primarily a financial threat or a logistical inconvenience. It is a threat to the last remaining solid ground of her childhood. That is worth fighting for. That is worth walking into a difficult conversation with the Queen Consort over. And apparently Beatrice decided, quietly, deliberately, with the kind of steel that rarely appears in the polite profiles written about her, that she was going to make sure everyone knew it. What does this confrontation mean for the future relationship between Beatrice and Camilla? Almost certainly, something has changed. The surface-level cordiality that both women have maintained will be harder to sustain when both of them know that Beatrice delivered this challenge. Royal family members are extraordinarily practiced at maintaining the appearance of harmony in public while conducting entirely different conversations in private, and both Beatrice and Camilla are seasoned enough to know how to manage appearances. But managing appearances is not the same as resolving the underlying tension. That tension, between what Camilla wants and what Beatrice is prepared to accept, will persist. It will surface in small ways at family gatherings, in the way invitations are extended or not extended, in the way access to certain things is made easier or harder. That is how the royal family processes its conflicts, not through dramatic ruptures usually, but through the slow accumulation of small exclusions and small favors, the language of proximity and distance that everyone who has ever spent time around an institution like the monarchy learns to speak fluently. What it might also mean, and this is speculative but not unreasonable to consider, is that Beatrice has, by this action, made a decision about who she is within the royal hierarchy. She has chosen her father's side in a way that is visible and documented and cannot be undone. That is a choice that defines her position within the family going forward. It makes her, in some people's eyes, someone to be kept at a careful distance from any decisions about the future of the royal family's direction. And it makes her, in her own family's eyes, her father's eyes, her mother's eyes, her sister's eyes, something much more precious. The one who showed up. The one who said the thing that needed to be said. The one who didn't look away. The Royal Lodge confrontation will not be the last chapter in this story. Andrew will eventually resolve his standoff with the palace, one way or another, through negotiation, through legal process, through the simple reality that leases end, and institutions have patience that individuals cannot match. Beatrice will continue to navigate her dual existence as a peripheral royal and a very normal person with a job and a family and a life that does not revolve around palaces and protocol. Camilla will continue to consolidate her position as Queen Consort with the particular combination of patience and determination that has always been her most effective tool. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Royal Lodge will sit in its green acres in Windsor, absorbing more history, storing more secrets, being exactly what it has always been. A place where the personal and the political become impossible to separate, and where the people who live and fight over it discover, again and again, that what looks like a dispute about property is always, underneath it, a dispute about belonging. That is what Beatrice understood when she walked into that conversation. That is what she was defending. Not the lease, not the rooms, not the garden or the maintenance costs or the logistics of who lives where. She was defending the right of her family to belong somewhere, to have a home, to be, in at least one physical place in the world, still themselves. Not a scandal, not a diminished branch of the royal tree, not a problem to be managed, but a family. And whatever you think about the politics of it, whatever you think about Andrew's conduct or Camilla's ambitions or the institution's calculations, there is something in that which is simply, undeniably, human. And the extraordinary thing is that she looked the Queen Consort of England in the face and said so. That is what happened. That is the story, and it is far from over. The full scope of what this confrontation will eventually produce, what precedent it sets, what doors it closes, what unexpected doors it might open, won't be visible for months or perhaps years. These things move slowly in the world of the monarchy. They are processed and internalized and expressed through the long rhythms of institutional life, rather than through immediate dramatic consequences. But the moment itself, Beatrice, composed and direct, telling Camilla to her face that this is not something she has the right to, is already a fixed point. It already happened. And whether it is remembered as the moment a forgotten princess found her voice, or the moment a well-intentioned young woman made an unwinnable enemy, it will be remembered. Because in the carefully managed, meticulously controlled world of the British royal family, someone who actually says the thing out loud is always, eventually, remembered. If you want to know who Princess Beatrice really is, beneath the hats and the weddings and the carefully curated public smile, perhaps this is the answer. She is someone who showed up for her family when showing up cost something. She is someone who looked at the most powerful woman in the royal family and told her the truth as she saw it. She is someone who decided that some things matter more than staying in everyone's good graces. That is a harder thing to be than it looks. It is also, in its own complicated way, admirable. And it is the kind of thing that, 20 or 30 years from now, when someone writes the full account of this chapter in royal history, will be one of the moments they return to again and again. The quiet confrontation in a grand room that changed, in ways big and small, how the story went. Hold on to that, because the next chapter is still being written. Let's also think about what this moment means for the broader conversation about women in the royal family, because it is a conversation worth having. The narrative of the monarchy tends to focus on the men, on Charles and William and Harry and Andrew, and treat the women as either support systems or complications. Camilla was a complication who became a support system. Meghan was a support system who became, in the palace's telling, a complication. Kate is the perfect support system, praised for it endlessly and rewarded with visibility and warmth. And the York sisters, Beatrice and Eugenie, have been mostly invisible, slotting into whatever category the story needs them to occupy at any given moment. But Beatrice, in this moment, stepped outside of every category available to her. She was not the supportive royal. She was not the decorative royal. She was not the decorative royal. She was simply a person who had something to say and said it. And that simple act of agency, that refusal to remain in the space the institution had designated for her, is what makes this story bigger than the property dispute that frames it. There is a generational dimension here too that deserves attention. Beatrice and Eugenie are millennials. They grew up with the internet. They have watched public opinion shaped and reshaped in real time. They have seen what happens when women in their family stay silent and what happens when they speak. They watched their mothers spend decades trying to rehabilitate a reputation that was shredded in public with little warning. They watched the press consume and spit out women who were too visible, too loud, too emotional, too much. And they watched their cousin Harry and Meghan make the most dramatic exit in modern royal history, driven in significant part by the sense that the institution would not protect them, and that speaking publicly was the only protection available. Beatrice and Eugenie have learned from all of it. They are not naive about the cost of confrontation, but they are also not willing to simply absorb whatever the institution decides without registering an objection. That willingness to register an objection, quietly, privately, directly, is its own kind of revolution in a family that has elevated silence to an art form. The palace's response to all of this, to Andrew's defiance, to Beatrice's confrontation, to the ongoing saga of Royal Lodge, has been, predictably, to say as little as possible in public. No spokesperson has confirmed the confrontation. No courtier has gone on record to detail the specifics of what was said. The palace communicates through omission as much as statement, and the deafening absence of any official response to the reports of Beatrice's words to Camilla is itself a kind of confirmation. A tacit acknowledgement that something significant happened that the palace would very much prefer not to discuss. If it had been nothing, if it had been gossip with no basis, the response would likely have been a clean, unequivocal denial. The silence is more complicated than that. And then there is the question of Sarah Ferguson's role in all of this, which cannot be entirely separated from Beatrice's. Fergie, to put it plainly, is a woman who has been through the fire. She has been publicly humiliated, financially ruined, excluded, included, photographed in unflattering moments, praised for her resilience, criticized for her lack of decorum, and through all of it she has maintained a kind of indomitable cheerfulness that is either the most inspiring thing in British public life or the most maddeningly impenetrable, depending on your mood. She loves her daughters with a ferocity that is one of the most consistent and undeniable things about her, and her daughters love her back with equal ferocity. The idea that the home she shares with their father, the home where the strange, warm, unconventional family they rebuilt after the divorce came together, might be taken from her, is not something Beatrice can accept neutrally. It is not an administrative issue. It is personal. It is her mother. And the Fergie factor, which rarely gets the weight it deserves in analyses of this situation, is almost certainly a significant part of what drove Beatrice to say what she said. Think for a moment about what it takes to do what Beatrice did. She is not a woman who moves through the world looking for confrontation. She is, by every account of people who know her, thoughtful and measured and disinclined toward drama. She married a man who is steady and supportive and low-key. She has built a life that is, by royal standards, almost aggressively normal. She does not court controversy. She does not give interviews designed to set the record straight or position herself advantageously within the family politics. She is, in the most genuine sense, someone who prefers to keep her head down and get on with things. And the fact that someone with that temperament and those instincts chose, deliberately and with clear eyes, to walk into this confrontation tells you that the situation had reached a point where keeping her head down no longer felt like an option she could live with. There will be people who say she went too far. That you do not speak to the Queen Consort that way, regardless of the circumstances. That whatever your grievances about Royal Lodge or the treatment of your father or the position of your mother, there are ways to register your objection that do not involve looking the second most senior woman in the British monarchy in the face and telling her she has no right to something. Those people are not wrong, exactly, in the sense that there are rules about these things, unwritten but deeply understood, and Beatrice broke one of them. But rules within families, even royal families, exist in relationship with love and loyalty and the particular gravity of certain situations. And when the situation reaches the point that Beatrice apparently felt it had reached, the rule about not confronting the Queen Consort starts to feel less like a law of nature and more like a guideline that can, with sufficient provocation, be set aside. The final thing to say, and it may be the most important thing, is that this story is not really about Camilla. Camilla is the catalyst, the focus of the confrontation, the person to whom the words were directed. But the story is about Beatrice. It is about who she is and who she has become. It is about a woman who spent her public life being overlooked and underestimated, who survived a childhood that was conducted partly in front of a global audience, who emerged from the scandals attached to her family with her dignity intact and her sense of self apparently whole, and who finally, in this moment, showed the world and her family what she is made of. She is made of something harder and more enduring than anyone who has watched her from the outside might have expected. She walked into a room with the Queen of England's wife and said the thing that needed to be said. She did it for her father. She did it for her mother. She did it for herself. And she did it knowing that there would be a cost. That is courage. It is imperfect courage, complicated courage, courage that is entangled with family politics and grief and loyalty. But it is courage. And it is the kind that matters most. The kind that happens in private, without an audience, without the protection of public sympathy, when the only thing driving you forward is the simple, fierce conviction that you cannot stay silent and still call yourself the person you want to be. That is Princess Beatrice. That is what happened. And as the Royal Lodge saga continues to unfold, and as Camilla continues to quietly, methodically consolidate her position, and as Andrew continues his stubborn vigil in that vast, expensive, memory-soaked house, this confrontation will sit at the center of it all. A small, private, seismic moment that explains everything about what this family is fighting for, and why none of them can stop.